we learn quite quickly on that there's an appropriate range for different types of punches to be thrown offensively. For example, if my opponent is at a far range and I'm trying to use my rear hand, something like a right straight or a right cross are two appropriate and effective punches to throw, whereas a rear uppercut is quite awkward, slow, it's not going to have power, it's going to throw me off, it's going to be easy to defend against, and just anatomically speaking, I cannot get the same range that I can with a rear straight, right? So for that reason, we don't throw it. And we see this quite early on in our athletic careers because it's quite intuitive on a first level basis. First level being our visual cues. We are looking for openings that our opponent is presenting to us and the distance at which they are able to be dealt with. So we know, quite intuitively speaking, that if, for example, I'm in this position, that I have quite a lot of space down the center line that is exposed that could be dealt with by punches at a mid or long range, which are good for straight punches, right? However, if I'm in a guard like this, well, those punches are not open as easily because I'm defended in those places. However, I might be leaving places open like the sides of my body for attacks like hooks to the body, which are close range attacks, right? So it's quite obvious that we can't throw this when we're close and we can't throw this when we're far because it's just obvious as a visual cue in our offense. What we forget is that our defense, in terms of our lead hand or our guard hand, also has to have an appropriate range depending on the types of punches that we're throwing, right? Because if we're at range to throw a close rear uppercut, then a long guard is not appropriate because this is something we're going to be using to frame, to do things like distance management, gauging distance, swatting away punches, parrying and blocking, throwing jabs, and so on, right? And it's quite obvious why fighters don't think of this or they forget this because they often have the misconception that all defense, when good punchers, good boxers bob under punches or block punches and so on, that they're doing so purely reflexively. Whereas a more sophisticated boxer understands that that's only one component, probably not even the majority. Much more of it is based on things like angles and positions of the hand and offenses in terms of counterpunching and so on, right? But of course they wouldn't know that, so they often forget that this is an inappropriate defense for close range attacks, right? Because you have to take it one step further. You're not just looking at your opponent, you're looking at what your opponent is going to be looking at you, right? This is a game theory concept called leveling. Level 1 being, what do I think of my opponent? Level 2 being, what does my opponent think of me? Level 3 being, what does my opponent think that I think of him? And so on, right? And you probably don't need to go very far down this road to appropriately deal with punches, but it might be nice to have this concept in your head and at least be dealing with a level 2 or a level 3, right? But this is a game theory concept that I'm going to go into in detail in another video. Just to finish this one, if we're throwing something like rear uppercut or rear hook, it's much better to either transition into a defense like this, because these are the areas of my body that are exposed, and these are the places where my opponent is going to look for a counterpunch, right? Because if I'm throwing this uppercut, I'm open here, I'm open here, I'm open here. So if I'm out here and I want to come back, that's a further distance, right? It leaves me exposed if I come to the body. Whereas if I'm here and I get attacked with something like a rear uppercut, which is a very, or any uppercut, but an uppercut in general, while I'm throwing my own, this is a very common place I'm going to get attacked. So just having it here means that there is no opening in the first place. So I already know this is a place that I'm not going to be attacked, most likely. And if they do, I'm covered, so I don't even have to react. But if they throw, say, a hook to my face, this is all I have to travel, right? Or I can obviously duck under. And the same thing, as I'm throwing and I leave myself exposed here, it's the distance between here and here. Whereas from here to here is awkward and it's slow. For more information about how this actually applies and advanced concepts and how we evolve this throughout the fight as our opponent adapts to us, the so-called metagame that I was speaking of, leveling, game theory concepts, I'm going to go into a deeper video that's more long form. I know this is already long form, but we'll go very long form, right? And you can follow that. I'll link it below if you want to learn more about these concepts.